Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to our presentation for an international joint e-conference BLM2 ICA M4. We're going to talk about our upcoming research, which is trade facilitation in regional trade agreements, a systematic literature review. So let's start.
So now we will talk about trade facilitation and regional trade agreement. What trade facilitation is? Actually, there is no globally agreed definition of trade facilitation. So yet WTO and some other organizations try to define it. Trade facilitation is the simplification, modernization, and harmonization of international trade procedures. For an example, simplification of customs procedures. So let's talk about regional trade agreement. It's basically reciprocal preferential trade agreements between two or more partners. They have allowed countries negotiate rules and commitments that go beyond what was possible multilaterally. So if we look at the WTO statistics, we can find that as of today, 350 regional trade agreements in force, which have been notified under WTO. So what's the purpose of this study? So basically this study tries to explore how trade facilitation provisions in regional trade agreements are addressed in different studies. So first we will look for some studies. In those studies, how trade facilitation issues have been addressed. Next one is we will seek to explore whether these provisions of trade facilitation in the regional trade agreements are burdensome for developing countries based on those studies.
Let's talk about the research questions and methodology. We have found two specific research questions are how trade facilitation provisions covered in regional trade agreements are addressed in different studies. And our second research question is whether the provisions of trade facilitations are covered in the trade agreements are burdensome for developing countries, which includes LCDs and LLDCs. So to conduct this research, we used the PRISMA method. It is known as preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Using this method, an overview of these linkages between trade facilitation and regional trade agreement as repeated in those studies would be highlighted.
So what's the significance of trade facilitations? If we look into the liberalization under WTO and regional trade agreement, we will find that traditional barriers like tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers reduces significantly. But yet, cost of international trade has not been reduced significantly. Rather, it has been increased and becoming visible. So in other hand, development of information technology puts some pressures on enhancing the competitiveness of the products. Managing the increased volume of international trade, in these circumstances, the issue of trade facilitation finds its significance. Statistics of WTO estimates that the full implementation of trade facilitation agreement could reduce trade costs by an average of 14.3% and boost global trade by up to $1 trillion per year, with the biggest gains in the poorest countries. Another important issue of trade facilitation is recently a trend has been shown that role of using trade facilitation provisions could be used in the regional trade agreements in time of present and future crises and pandemics. In this scenario, this issue is gained more significance in recent days. So now we look at the trade facilitation issue under WTO arena. So before WTO, there were narrower coverage in the trade facilitation in previous regional trade agreements, in which we can find that it has been used as customs procedures, and issues were fewer than the recent one. During the last decade, trade facilitation has emerged as a trade enhancing policy instrument. After the trade facilitation agreement came into force on 22nd February 2017 under WTO, the issue of trade facilitation gained much wider attention and crossed the boundary of the multilateral trading system. That means it has entered into regional trade agreement. So at that time, it started becoming an integral part of the regional trade agreements. However, although there is no specific legal obligation in the trade facilitation agreement regarding the coverage of trade facilitation issues, like how and in what way the issue of trade facilitation would be addressed in the resolutory agreement. There is no specific legal provisions in the WTO agreement on these issues. Moreover, the growing number of trade facilitation provisions in the regional trade agreement reflects that this issue of trade facilitation gained significance over time. Moreover, if we look into the recent mega regional agreements like SEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, like RCEP and CPTPP, they have started including some more stringent provisions like WTO plus issues or like WTO X issues under trade facilitation. So we can find those issues in those mega regional agreements. Now we'll look the implementation progress under WTO trade facilitation agreement. We will find an interesting scenario that the developed countries implementation ratio is 100%, which means that they have well equipped with trade facilitation issues. They don't need to further add something new regarding trade facilitation. But on the other hand, developing member countries and least developed countries and landlocked developing countries, they have something to add in their regional trade agreement to cover trade facilitation issues. In this connection, the issue is more significant for the developing countries in broad sense, and least developed countries and landlocked developing countries and developing countries. They should learn something how they will capture these issues in the regional trade agreements. They have something to learn from these trade facilitation issues. So what's our research findings and how can we utilize this knowledge, what we are looking for? Finding of this study would be a great source towards reflecting existing trade agreements as well as the inclusion of trade facilitation provisions in future trade agreements. And secondly, this study put forward a set of policy recommendations exclusively for all developing countries, including least developed countries and landlocked developing countries. So they will think of these issues of trade facilitations, how they can use their future or current, how they can update their existing regional trade agreement to cover this as a significant issue of trade facilitation, and they get the maximum benefit out of including these issues in regional trade agreement. We hope this study would be an interesting one and would be beneficial for developing countries to expand their global trade.
And thank you very much. That was all. If you have some questions, you are free to ask in the comment section.